NFL free agency. There are teams that need to be graded. I want your help in doing so. Let's go. Yes, Kenny C back on the ones and twos with you guys, talking some football today. Gonna get into some free agency letter grades, grading a few teams. Definitely going to get in here and talk about the Packers, so my cheeseheads, you'll want to stay tuned for this. But subscribe to the channel. For those that are new to this channel, we talk any and all sports, football, baseball, basketball, hockey. You will want to subscribe. We get the NFL draft just about a month away. I am excited for that. We're going to talk free agency in this one, and I want your guys' thoughts. I want to know what letter grades you guys would give the teams that I'm going to talk about, and what letter grade you give your own team. Whatever team you're a fan of, I want to hear from you. Comment in the comment section below. Subscribe to the channel. Let's get down to business. The Green Bay Packers, very minimal movements in this free agency. Brian Gutekunst has a lot to do in this draft. The Packers have immense needs at wide receiver, at DB, at interior offensive line, at linebacker, at edge rusher. We have a lot to address in this draft because Gutekunst, interior offensive line, he did address that, but we could always use some more help because right now we only have 2 starting tackles. That's it, Zach Tom and Rasheed Walker. Nobody else on the roster is a tackle, so we definitely need to address that in this draft, in my opinion. But the Packers go out in free agency. They get Nate Hobbs, cornerback, 4-year vet from the Raiders, the Illinois product. They sign him to a 4-year, $48 million deal, 281 tackles, 3 interceptions, and 3 sacks. This is a guy that brings versatility to that secondary for the Packers. Last year, we saw Keyshawn Nixon kind of play out of his position and play the perimeter. We saw Javon Bullard get a lot of time in the slot. Now with this, Hobbs is a guy that plays in the slot or he can play on the perimeter. I really love the move. And by the way, Keyshawn Nixon and Hobbs were teammates with the Raiders. So the Packers go out and get Hobbs. I like the move. Wide receiver McCole Hardman was the most recent acquisition, just on a 1-year deal. But let's face it, he's a slight step above a Devin Funchess or a Sammy Watkins, whom the Packers have signed in the past. And it was kind of like a meh sort of move. This is a depth move. This is a vet presence. This is a guy that does bring speed. He's a gadget guy. He can definitely play on special teams, although we know Keyshawn Nixon has been the guy. So maybe they rotate those two with the special teams. But Hardman is a veteran. He brings finally some sort of veteran acumen to this extremely young and drop-heavy Packers wide receiving core. I wanted them to go out and go after all in. I wanted them to maybe go after DK. I know that the Steelers traded a 2nd-round pick for him and they paid him $33 million a year, but I would have went after DK. I wanted Chris Godwin. I know he had the injury last year, but he's a stable vet wide receiver who is extremely good when on the field. I wanted him, but he returned to the Bucs. T. Higgins, who we know finally got the bag, $28 million annually. Don't think the Packers were going to do that, but the guy is young, so maybe we should have, but he was probably going to, I know the Bengals tagged him, but he was probably going to stay in Cincy. But Cooper Kupp went to Seattle. We saw Devontae Adams go to the Rams. These are guys that I wanted, the Packers to go after and get a vet, a true proven vet that still has some juice in the tank. I'm not saying McCole Hardman doesn't, but he's not as good as some of these other guys that were out there. Now, Stephon Diggs and Amari Cooper are still out there. I mean, you could say they're washed up, whatever you want to say. Amari Cooper had a decent year with the Bills and was a vet presence for them going to the playoffs. Stephon Diggs obviously had the injury, so you take a risk there. Now, the biggest move that the Packers made was bringing in guard, the Notre Dame product, Aaron Banks, on a 4-year, $77 million deal. $19 million annually for the man. So a hefty price for the guard, but he was the top dog out there. This guy's a bulldozer. He's an absolute beast. He was an anchor for the 49ers. I love the move. This now brings flexibility. Elgton Jenkins can kick into center if the Packers don't address that in the draft, because we lost Josh Myers, signed with the New York Jets. So we have some options here. Sean Ryan could stay at his right guard spot, and you have Aaron Banks at left guard, your 2 tackles in Tom and Walker, and Jenkins could play center if need be. Not too shabby. I love the move. The Packers obviously pride themselves on offensive line. I was a fan of the move. In terms of re-signs, we brought back Isaiah McDuffie, linebacker, and kicker Brandon McManus. So the Packers still have to address that linebacker position. They need to get pressure on the quarterback, as we saw they failed to do against the Eagles in the playoffs. You need somebody that's an impact pass rusher. So I'd like to see them go out and get somebody in the draft perhaps. But all in all, I'm going to give the Packers a C letter grade in this one. Not too flashy, made some decent picks, or pickups I should say. Didn't do the most, kind of stayed pat. So for that, I'll give them a C. They addressed the interior offensive line by getting Banks. They definitely addressed defensive back because we let Stokes walk, we let Ballantyne walk, and for good reason. Ballantyne didn't really get the most burn. Stokes, in my opinion, is an immense bust. Jair's played 14 games over the last 2 years. His time in Green Bay is still teetering right now. We're not sure what's going to go on with that, if he's going to come back. But from most of the reports that I was reading, probably leaning towards just getting rid of him. So we definitely have to make some moves in the draft, even with the Hobbs acquisition. What do you guys think? For my cheeseheads, what do you think? Do you think the Packers did enough? Do you think they did too little? And what's your thoughts moving forward? I'm going to have a mock draft video, so you guys want to stay tuned for that. I'm definitely going to have a mock draft video. For Packers fans, you can give me your thoughts on that. Who do the Packers go with the number 23rd overall pick? I think they should go wide receiver. We'll get into that, though. Moving on here with the Buffalo Bills. I like what the Bills did. First and foremost, they re-signed their franchise guy, the MVP, Josh Allen, on a 6-year, $330 million deal, $250 million guaranteed. You got to think the Bills will at least get one bowl under Allen's belt over the next 6 years, right? I don't know, because they didn't seem to get Jim Kelly his ring. So we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens. But then they brought back Gregory Rousseau, 4 years, $80 million. Josh Palmer, they bring him into that wide receiving core, adds a little bit of depth. He's young. He's got some talent. They bring him in on a 3-year, $36 million deal, the former Charger. This was the big move that made me say I'm going to give the Bills a B+ here. They shored up the defensive line, and they got a pass rusher in Joey Bosa. I know he's got an injury history, but it's a team-friendly 1-year, $12.6 million deal. I love the move. You throw him on that line, out with Von Miller, in with Bosa, him and Rousseau rushing the passer. Then they bring in Larry Ogunjobi, 1 year, $8.3 million. This guy is a run stuffer in every sense of the word. He moves quick for his size, and he's a disruptor up the middle. This is a guy that the Bills definitely need, just causing havoc in the middle of that line. And bringing in a guy like Bosa, I love it. Great moves all around. They bring back Terrell Bernard again, or they re-signed Terrell Bernard, I should say, one of their best linebackers, pairing with Matt Milano on a 4-year, $50 million deal. I like the Buffalo Bills moves. What say you guys? Moving right along to that other AFC East team, the New England Patriots. In my opinion, they had arguably the best free agency. I'll give them an A-. You brought in Morgan Moses, former New York Jet, 3-year, $24 million. So you bring in a starter for that offensive line, albeit if he can stay healthy. They brought in Garrett Bradbury, the former Viking, on a 1-year deal. Wes Schweitzer, the guard, on a 1-year deal. So they're adding some depth to this offensive line here. But the defense, they shored up this defense. They went out and got one of the top defensive backs out there in Carlton Davis to pair with Gonzalez, Christian Gonzalez. That's going to be a duo to be reckoned with. A 3-year, $60 million deal for Carlton Davis. I know he dealt with some injuries last year with Detroit, but I really like that move. Robert Spillane, an absolute dog of a linebacker, played for the Raiders last season. They bring him in, and they bring in Milton Williams. They gave him the bag, 4 years, $104 million. But if you saw what he did in that Super Bowl, he should have been Super Bowl MVP for the Eagles. This was a gigantic move for Vrabel and that Patriots defense, bringing in Milton Williams, and they bring in edge from the Titans, Harold Landry, on a 3-year, $43.5 million deal. They brought in a bunch of dogs on defense. They brought in some depth to their offensive line for Drake May. That's why I'm giving the Pats an A- here. I really like their moves. My Patriots fans out there, I want to hear what you guys have to say. What letter grade would you give the Pats? Moving right on along here to the NFC North. Going back to the NFC North here. Going to talk about the Chicago Bears, because as much of a diehard Packers fan as I am, for my cheeseheads watching this right now, you know we absolutely hate the Bears, but you got to keep it unbiased when you're talking football, at least in my opinion. When you're talking in general terms and when you're giving grades for free agency, you got to keep it a buck, and that's what I'm going to do. The Chicago Bears, for me, they get an A in this free agency. They go out and they shore up the trenches. They already are an offensive unit that has weapons on the perimeter at their wide receiver position, at their tight end position, with their running back. They're probably going to have to go into the draft, in my opinion, and get another back in maybe the first round. Maybe they go after GT, or maybe in the second and third they find another running back to add some depth there. But obviously Caleb Williams has some talent. He was the most sacked quarterback last season, and that's why the Bears said, all right, we're done playing around. Let's go trade with the Chiefs and get Joe Thuney. They bring him in. 2026 fourth-round pick is what they had to give to the Chiefs to get him. But you get a vet presence and an absolute beast of a guard in Joe Thuney. They went out and they got Jonah Jackson. They traded with the Rams, a 2025 sixth-round pick. 29 games in the last 3 years. He played just 4 games last year, so he's got some injury history, folks. Detroit Lion for the brunt of his career, drafted by the Lions. Was a Ram last year, only played in 4 games before going down with injury. So we'll have to see there, but if he's healthy, that's a good guard move. That's a good pickup. And then they get the most highly coveted center out in free agency and give him some good chunk of change. 3 years, $42 million for Drew Dahlman, the former Atlanta Falcon. They shore up that offensive line. They say, we're done playing around. Kevin Jenkins, see you later, pack your bags. And they shore up their offensive line. I like the moves on the offensive line from the Chicago Bears. And then they go on defense and say, you know what? We're going to bring in a dog, a vet, a guy that still has a lot left in the tank in Grady Jarrett. 3 years, $43.5 million for Grady Jarrett. I like that. I like that move. They're bringing in a guy that's going to be an impact player on the defensive line, and then they bring out Dayo Odeyingbo on a 3-year, $48 million deal, the former Lion. They bring in edge rusher Odeyingbo. This is a guy that is stout against the run, and he can shore up the middle for the Bears on that defensive side. So these are 2 guys that Dennis Allen is going to love to incorporate into his defense. And I like they go out and they address what they need to address. You got to get an offensive line in front of Caleb Williams. Got to get some more impact players on that defensive line. This is a Bears team that's looking pretty good, and they have Johnson clearly, Ben Johnson, who talked a lot of smack, but we'll see what happens when the season starts. I'm not worried about the Bears, but I'm going to keep it unbiased, and I'm going to give you guys, I'm going to tell it how it is, and I'm giving them an A here. As for the Minnesota Vikings, I think they had a pretty good free agency as well. Re-signed Aaron Jones on a 2-year, $20 million deal. That's not too shabby. They re-signed Byron Murphy, so they keep him in that secondary, one of the top cornerbacks in this league. Then they go out and they bring in 2 former Colts to shore up the O-line. Now, a lot of people in the comment section are going to say, how are you going to give Minnesota the letter grade that you're giving them? I'm giving them a B. How are you going to give them that letter grade when more than half the players they got have an injury history? Let me tell you why. They went out and they got Will Fries, offensive guard from the Colts. The kid is 26 years old. He only became a starter in 2023. Last year, he obviously missed some time. He missed a lot of time. He had that tibia injury, the fractured tibia. They signed him to a 5-year, $88 million deal. That's 1 year of injuries that he had last year. He's going to come into the season healthy. He is young, and he will be a solid anchor for this Vikings offensive line. Then they go out and get Ryan Kelly, who last year dealt with a knee injury, had some surgery to clean up a joint. 2 years, $18 million. That's not that bad. That's $9 million annually. I mean, I'll take that if I'm a Vikings fan. This guy was a stalwart for the Colts offensive line, and when both of these gentlemen are healthy, which they will be going to this season, they revamped that O-line. They see it was obviously partially on Darnold as to why he took that many sacks in the playoffs. But it was also, the offensive line wasn't the best. So they say, okay, we're going to revamp it. Let's bring in Will Fries. Let's bring in Ryan Kelly. That's 2 solid pieces, more than solid pieces on the offensive line, in my opinion. Then they go out, they get defensive tackle Jonathan Allen. 3-year, $51 million. He had a torn pec last year, but this is a wrecking ball of a man. He had 5.5 sacks in 2023. He had 7.5 in 2022. I like this move. This is a game record. He's an absolute bull, Jonathan Allen is. I like the move. And then they get Javon Hargrave, who I know a lot of Jets fans in the comments are going to be like, Javon Hargrave, we saw him last year. He's washed up. He obviously missed 14 games with a torn tricep last year. They bring him on a 2-year, $30 million deal, $15 million a year. And if you look at his numbers in terms of pressures and getting to the quarterback and just being that presence, from 2021 to 2023, he's ranked in the top 10 in pressures, and he has the most pressures, most average pressures, I believe, with 14 since 2021 per Next Gen Stats. So that's a good move. If this guy comes into the year healthy and ready to go, same with Allen. A lot of this rides on the health, clearly, but these are guys that don't have a long history. Ryan Kelly, out of the 4 of these gentlemen, probably has the most room for concern with regards to injuries. But for the most part, Jonathan Allen has been a consistent player for the Washington Commanders. Javon Hargrave for the 49ers. Will Freeze is very new. He's 26 years old, out of Penn State. Let's pump the brakes, folks, because when this offensive line and this D-line is healthy come this season, they're both going to be very good units, in my opinion. Watch, the Vikings, their offensive line is going to be, in my opinion, a top 5 unit. So those are my grades for a multitude of teams. I want to know what your grades are. I want them in the comment section below, and you're going to stay tuned. You're going to promise me you stay tuned, because I will have a mock draft video coming soon as we get closer to the draft in April. I'm definitely going to dial up a mock draft, so you'll want to stay tuned for that. Subscribe to the channel for more football content, because this stuff will not stop all summer long. I promise you that. Thank you guys for watching, and subscribe.